Good evening. Good evening. I, Cassandra Phillips, Vice President of the Duncanville ISD Board of Trustees, call this meeting of the Duncanville Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of Board of Trustees is present, that the meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Our mission at Duncanville ISD is to engage, equip, and empower all scholars to achieve their unique potential. We will now move to opening ceremonies, and Trustee Janet Veracruz, would you lead us in the invocation, please?
Absolutely. Please join me for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we come united, seeking for guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussions and nurture the bonds of community in tonight's meeting. Lord, we join our hearts together that you enable us to hear you clearly, to listen to each other attentively, to imagine our future, to stay together in charity, to embrace the greater good, to edify your gifts to the future generations. Lord, fill us with your grace as we make decisions that may affect the students, staff, and educators. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Trustee Veracruz. Trustee Janice Savage Martin will lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you, Trustee Janice Savage Martin. We will now move on to the superintendent's report, and I will now turn the meeting over to Dr. Smith.
All right, thank you, Trustee Phillips. Other board members, good to see you this evening. Those that are in attendance have the following items that I would like to report on this evening. And so I will begin with a legislative update. So if you could advance the slide, please. So our board, each month, we bring legislative updates to you. I am following the legislative session very closely and just really want to share key updates. On the left side of that slide, you see some legislative priority bills. On the right side, you see just some activity notes that I want to share with you. The four bills that really have surfaced as priority based on the last couple of weeks' conversations, you see one there, House Bill 1548, and that basically proposes a pay increase for teachers, counselors, nurses, and librarians, with adjustments to the steps and an additional $1,500 for 23-24 and 25% increase for 23-24 for other full-time employees, excluding administrators. So obviously we're still very early in the process, such a long way to go before anything is adopted, but this bill has really been getting a lot of traction. The second one there is HB 1672. Basically, what that is doing is increasing the basic allotment. And just for definition purposes, the basic allotment is that legislative mandated appointed series of funds that are allotted for each particular school district. So each school district in the state gets a basic allotment. It's legislatively mandated. And so what this bill is addressing is increasing the basic allotment. And so it requires the commissioner to submit to the TEA any budget adjustments and adjustments to the basic allotment specifically for inflation purposes. So I wanted to share that with you. The next one is HB 1416. It makes adjustments to the accelerated learning requirements that were established last session. You may remember a lot of conversation about House Bill 4545 and the difficult way that we were able to kind of manage and work our way through that. It was quite a challenge, but this bill discusses removing the required learning committee meetings and focusing on reading and math only. And then HB 1802 allows an athlete participating in UIL to earn compensation or have representation if they are 18 years or older. These are some of the big bills that were part of the conversation. Again, a long way to go before anything is passed, but it is important to know that these bills took up a lot of conversation over the last couple of days and weeks. The Senate, they've set their committees up, and so Senator Creighton is leading the Education Committee, and Senator Huffman is chairing the Finance Committee. And it's good to know that Senator West, who's our legislator, he is on both of those committees. So that's important to know. Finance Committee is already meeting, and they discussed education quite a bit, education funding on last Monday. There was significant discussion around truancy, discipline supports, special education funding, instructional materials, and funding that districts use for the basic allotment. And a lot of conversation centered on funding based on enrollment versus attendance. That's been really getting a lot of conversation. Funding school districts based on enrollment instead of attendance. So we're cautiously optimistic that some of the financial support that we really need from the session will be provided for districts. I do emphasize the word cautiously optimistic. During the Midwinter Conference, we had an opportunity to hear several groups regarding legislative happenings. I participated in one event, very informative luncheon with Raise Your Hand Texas, and we discussed a range of issues from vouchers to accountability, and it was just good hearing three legislators from North Texas talk about those particular topics. Again, I do receive weekly legislative updates. Helps me to stay abreast, keep you abreast of what actions and activities are going on in the session. There are several upcoming events that we have, the Tasby Legislative Conference. We have the North Texas Legislative Network update meetings. I'll be putting those dates in our weekly update in case you want to attend some of those. Actually, we have 3 board members so far scheduled to go to the Texas Black Caucus board members meeting, which is March 4th, I believe, somewhere in there. March 9th? 9th, okay. March 9th, somewhere in there. I was close. But you all are going to that, Trustee Dr. Ivory, if my memory serves me correctly, Trustee Phillips, and Trustee Veracruz, is that right? So you all will be participating in that, and so you'll learn a lot of information there. There have been over 400 education bills that have been filed so far, just to kind of get a sense of the number of bills that are filed. And so we're tracking several, but we're specifically watching the ones that are aligned with our particular priorities. So as we talked about, how can the school board members advocate? Well, you are doing that. One, you got to know your legislators. We all know, you know, Senator West, you know, Representative Davis, you know, Representative Carl Sherman. You all have good relationships and stay in contact with them, so that's a good thing. And then develop your own legislative priorities, and you have done that. All of our legislators have a copy of your legislative priorities, and we meet with them regularly, and they call us a lot while they're actually up there in session. They'll ask us questions, and we'll send them information so that they're armed with key data facts associated with our district so that they can speak with good confidence and command as they're working through the issues. And then attending legislative conferences and briefings and just staying current with the discussions. And so all of you are doing that. So I think we're doing a pretty good job, and we'll continue to keep you up to date as we move forward. Next slide, please. I mentioned just briefly, I had an opportunity to attend a session last week during Midwinter. Raise Your Hand Texas, might have been 2 weeks ago now, during Midwinter, Raise Your Hand Texas. That was an opportunity for superintendents to get together. Again, we had a session with 3 North Texas legislators, and a lot of good information shared there. We had an opportunity to advocate for things that are important for us and, of course, the things that we have prioritized. Also at the session, this is a state conference, Duncanville ISD was on the map. There was standing room only from individuals across the state to hear us present about the things that we're doing in Duncanville ISD to improve student outcomes. And so I was very pleased with that. We focused on a presentation called The Power of One, and it specifically spoke about the synergy and the plan that we have with school leadership, Chief Academic Officer, and CNI, and how those teams work together, and why it's so critical for there to be good synergy and good collaboration with those groups in order to improve student outcomes. So I was proud that we were accepted to present, and proud that, you know, people were there to listen to what we're doing in Duncanville to get good results. And we did indeed have a standing room only, so I was very proud. And good job to all the staff that participated in that. Thank you. Next slide, next two slides, I'm really excited about this. You know, we've got exceptional student athletes all across our district, and I'm really excited to announce to you all about our sparklers. The sparklers, they recently competed in their first ever National Cheer Association Special Olympics competition. And in their first time competing, they placed third. And so you've seen them at the football games throughout the course of the year. They really worked hard. I mean, they have a lot of pride about putting the Duncanville across their uniforms. And so we are proud of the sparklers. We do plan to bring them here so you can see them in person. We just have to make sure that we got to get the coordination with that. But wanted to highlight them. Want to thank the students, the parents, the sponsors for a job well done. The sparklers are under the leadership of Miss Elizabeth Thompson, and many of you as board members know Miss Thompson and the work and her commitment to our Special Olympics students. So I wanted to share that with you, and thank you. And then following up, we have first place Special Olympics in basketball. So under the leadership of Mr. James Hicks, we secured the first place in the Special Olympics basketball tournament. And so we also will be bringing those students here for you to meet moving forward. But congratulations again to our students, and thank you parents and staff for making that possible. Later this week, Duncanville ISD is one of two districts that have been selected as the Dr. Thomas Randall Demonstration District. The selection was based on the district's track record of success for working with at-risk students, closing the achievement gap, and demonstrating school improvement across the district. And so as a result, members of our leadership team will be there to share our journey for school improvement. And also there will be a special award given to myself and our district for the work that we've done. So again, many others are wanting to learn about what we've done, and I'm excited to be able to share and to be our district to be recognized in this way. The next item is My Future, My Choice. We're continuing to focus on creating choice opportunities for our parents, our students, our school district. And so we have a My Future, My Choice showcase that's coming up February 15th from 10 to 1 at Duncanville High School. This will be an opportunity to learn about free tuition for our pre-K programs. We also have a tuition-based program for pre-K students. All of our elementary and middle school choice options will be showcasing all of that in a nice environment, free food, lots of fun, really creating a lot of excitement so that we can showcase our programs. And all of our high school pathways like architectural design, automotive technology, education, and STEM, just to name a few, will be highlighted at this program. It'll be February 25th, 10 a.m. To 1 p.m. at Duncanville High School. And then lastly, there's not a slide for this because this news just came to us late. Board members, as many of you know, and it's not Coach Samples, I know that's the slide there. But as many of you know, over the last several years, we've done a lot of work to create the academic programming so that if any student would be in contention to receive a Merit Scholar, that they would have an opportunity to do that. And that's been a labor of several years of really building at those lower levels, the rigorous academic programming, the high school credit courses, adjusting the curriculum, the SAT prep. There's so many aspects that go into it to set the foundation so a student could even possibly have what they need to be a National Merit Scholar. And we've been working at that, and so proud to tell you, Bronson Hooper got the notification last week, and he's selected as one of only 15,000 students across the nation to advance as a National Merit Finalist. And that is awesome. That is, 1 in 15,000 nationally. He has already received a full ride to Yale University. And so he's trying to make a decision between MIT and Yale University. Yeah. So, but really proud of him. We've put a lot of social media out there about Bronson, but look forward to also bringing him here to meet you as well. So that concludes the superintendent report. Trustee Phillips, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. We will now move to recognitions. I will turn the meeting over to Ms. Connie Wallace.
All right, good evening, Vice President Phillips, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Smith. You may go to the next slide, please. I'll begin with our donations. I'm delighted to share that we received $970 in donations, and all of them are designated to our Panther Pantry. So we are grateful to our community for their continued support of our pantry, of our Panther Pantry. Are there any questions about the donations that we have received? All right, thank you. You may go to the next slide. And to the next presentation, actually. If I may continue, Vice President Phillips, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Smith, at this time, I would like to share with you guys about two amazing individuals that we have here in Duncanville ISD. Made with Pride in Duncanville is an opportunity for us to recognize a student, teacher, and staff member for the impact they have on members of the Duncanville ISD community. And we received numerous nominations, making it very difficult for us to select one person per category. This month, we are recognizing a teacher and a staff member. And our first honoree is Miss Mary Mercer. Miss Mercer, will you please join me here at the podium? I'm going to share a little bit about you. All right. So Miss Mercer is a third grade teacher at Central Elementary School, and she was nominated by a former student, Celeste Sorrells, and a former colleague, Ika Johnson. And they've shared some very delightful things about you. They said that Miss Mercer is an exceptional teacher. She goes above and beyond every day, dedicating her time and energy to her students. Miss Mercer is more than just a teacher. She is a mentor and a motivator. She creates a classroom environment where students feel welcomed, valued, and supported. Her lessons are engaging, interactive, and she inspires students to think critically and creatively. Ms. Mercer has a unique ability to connect with her students and to understand their individual needs. She takes the time to modify her teaching style to meet the needs of every single student. So we want to say thank you so much, Ms. Mercer, for all that you do for the students at Central Elementary School and for the impact that you are having here in Duncanville ISD. Let's give Ms. Mercer a round of applause. You may be seated. Thank you. You may be seated. Okay. And at this time, I would like to invite Mr. Thomas to please join me at the podium. going to share some things about you, Mr. Thomas. I think before tonight's meeting, this was the longest I've ever seen, or he's probably ever sat still waiting for something to happen. He's usually in the mix of everything. But Mr. Thomas is a security coordinator here in Duncanville ISD, and he was nominated by our Chief of Police, Chief Lambert, and Vicki Mercado. And they want everyone to know that Mr. Thomas goes above and beyond for his team, his peers, and the students of Duncanville ISD. When there is a need, he will quietly take care of it. He is extremely modest and doesn't like attention or recognition, but the quality of work he does is unmatched. Mr. Thomas stays late and arrives early. He is always there to help when anyone needs a hand. He truly cares and consistently demonstrates a commitment to the safety and well-being of our students and staff. Mr. Thomas is a testament to the vital role that law enforcement plays in creating a safe and secure environment for our students, staff, and community. One of your colleagues said, "There is no amount of recognition to properly thank Mr. Thomas for the dedication, the care, and love he shares with all of us." Ricky is everywhere. Even events he's not working at, he's still there. He will stop by to make sure everything is good and going very well, and that no one needs anything. Another colleague said, "When I think about Panther Pride, Ricky is the first person that comes to mind. I've never worked with anyone who is so willing to drop everything to complete the smallest task for the district he serves. I don't know what Dr. Bigby would do if we had to pay Ricky an amount of money that represents his dedication to Duncanville ISD. Mr. Thomas is an important pillar for the Duncanville ISD Police Department. Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas, for all that you do. We greatly appreciate you." Now, let's take a look at a video that we have prepared for them.
Duncanville ISD congratulates the following staff member and teacher who are made with pride in Duncanville.
Hi, I'm Mary Mercer. I'm a third grade teacher at Central Elementary. My teaching philosophy is I want all of my kiddos to be successful, no matter what it takes. I believe in my heart, and I've always thought this, that every child deserves a great childhood that includes a quality, great education with a teacher that loves them and supports them, and they know that that teacher loves and supports them. I get a thrill out of seeing them be successful, and I hold them to very high expectations. And I'm not going to let them fail. I want them to have that growth mindset. That's what we work on all year, a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset, to know that they will leave my class being successful. You know what? I love it. I don't think I would teach any other grade other than third grade.
The first part of my career as a security officer, I was out on the floor doing, what the security officers do now. Stayed out on the floor way back when we had ABC buildings, ABC and all this kind of good stuff here back in the Mr. Kreisberg days. So I've been doing it, working here at the high school for about 20 years. Pretty much start my morning 6 o'clock. I'm walking out of my door. Sometimes I don't enter 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night because I service pretty much every school in the district. I'm just not on the campus. So it's a busy day. After that, everything settled down. After the start of the day with that in the high school, that's when I start my journey throughout the district, going to each school, doing the Raptor check, to see if anything's going on, and I also do the badges, ID badges, student ID badges for the high school and all 3 middle schools. I'm responsible for doing that. If I miss work, something is wrong. I love my job. I love what I do. I love the kids in there, so they keep me up to date with what's going on. I just love the process of, of making sure that people are safe and can have a happy day, a blessed day, with no harm coming to them in any way, shape, form, or fashion. I always did say when I was at the American Hustle, I said, this is the best job in the world. And then I found Duncanville. I said, this is better than the American Hustle Association. I'm always here, whenever needed, for whatever reason.
These honorees truly are made with pride in Duncanville.
So at this time, if we have any family members or friends, colleagues that are here with Ms. Mercer and with Mr. Thomas, if you'll please stand and be recognized. Go ahead. Thank you. And at this time, we would like to invite our Vice President Phillips to join Ms. Mercer and Mr. Thomas for a quick photograph.
Just bear with us as we get organized from a rather lengthy executive session.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Okay, we are back from closed session. We will continue with our agenda items. We will now move to our consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
Yes, ma'am. I do have a motion. I'd like to move items 7A, B, and C to the consent agenda.
Trustee Savage Martin made a motion that we move
Second.
item A, B, and C from action to consent.
Second.
And the motion was seconded by trustee Ivory. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion? All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Any opposed? No. Motion passed, 6-0. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Madam Vice President, I move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Thank you, trustee Fahey. Trustee Fahey just moved to approve the consent agenda as amended. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have 5 seconds. Trustee Savage Martin seconded the motion, seconded the consent agenda be approved as amended. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. Any opposed? No? Okay, motion passed, 6-0. Thank you. Okay, we will now move to our information and discussion items. The first item is the first reading of TASB Local Policy Update 120 and COA Local. The presenter is Dr. Karen Halashka.
Good evening, Vice President Phillips, trustees, and Dr. Smith. In alignment with the strategic priority, Operational Excellence Goal 3, I am pleased to present to you this evening the first reading of Policy Update 120 and an additional local policy update. Next slide. Our district partners with the Texas Association of School Boards to prepare its policies. When policy updates are received, senior leadership reviews the legal and local policies to ensure compliance and alignment. Local policies are then shared with the board for review and adoption. Tonight, I will be sharing with you 6 local policy updates. You've been provided the annotated local policies in your packet this evening, along with TASB explanatory notes. For sake of time this evening, next slide. For sake of time this evening, I will provide a quick overview of the changes for each policy, but of course, if you would like more information or clarification, I'm happy to dive deeper into any of the recommended revisions. CB Local adds language requiring public notice and input prior to submitting a federal grant application. Language added also gives the superintendent grant approval authority after information has been provided to the school board. CKC Local is the next policy revision and adds train derailment as a required part of the district's emergency operations plan. For the policy FFI local, it is included as a notation that TEA has new minimum policy standards related to bullying that must be followed, and the public comments ended in late November, and TASB is working to update the policy now, but wanted us to go ahead and notify the board of this coming change. FNG local is a lengthy policy, but the changes here are really minor to clarify how special education and child nutrition complaints are handled. The last revision under Update 120 is FO local, which clarifies when student restraints may be used and moves the information about special education restraints just up in the policy a little bit to be more prominent. In addition to the policies in Update 120, there's one additional policy revision recommended by TASB. This is COA local, and it's being revised to more accurately reflect the position that oversees procurement as it relates to food and nutrition management. This, of course, concludes my overview of the local policy revisions in Update 120 and COA local. Our next steps will be listening to any recommendations or revisions from the board and adjusting the policies as requested prior to recommending for approval in March. Once approved, administration will provide to TASB for review and posting, and then create the necessary regulations to operationalize the board's governance policies. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Halachka. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion? Board? No? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we will move to the information discussion agenda item B, budget update for 2023 to 2024 budget. The presenter is Dr. Ed Bigby.
Good evening, Madam Vice President, board members, and Dr. Smith. Hadn't been a whole lot going on with the budget, but there has been some this month, so we'll cover that right quick. Next slide, please. This is the budget development process. You can see the little stars that establish campus budgets. I have to get my dentures fixed. Allocations by formula. I've actually done that, and for the first time since I've been here, we established those off of the October snapshot date, enrollments in those dates. And the first time since I've been here, every campus is going to get more money than they got last year. That's how our enrollment has trended. And it's still holding up so far. Knock on anything we can knock on, but it's the first time that's happened, so that's a good deal with our enrollment. I've visited on one campus already. They've had an opportunity to schedule with me. Quite a few have scheduled, so we'll be discussing those and then moving forward with the campus budgets. Okay, next slide. This is the timeline that we gave to you with a lot of yellow in it now, and the yellow just means those are things that are either taking place right now or have taken place. So you can see as we progress through the budget. I'll not bore you by reading all those to you, but that's what it is, and I believe you have that in your book. Next slide, please. Just quick cover words that we talk about all the time. Total enrollment's the number of kids that come to our school. Funding enrollment, if you'll remember in the legislature's infinite wisdom, they're only allowing us to count the pre-K kids as a half. So to get a funding enrollment, we have to have the total minus half of the pre-K kids. So that's the number we work with as far as funding. And the average daily attendance is based off of how many kids out of that funding enrollment are here. So you may see two different numbers. Total enrollment's actually the number of kids that we have to prepare for. And the funding enrollment's just half of the pre-K kids, even though they're full day. They didn't ask me. Current enrollment's 11,921. That's the total enrollment. Projected for next year, and the demographer will cover a little more of this, 11,842. That's total number of kids, which would make the funding enrollment 11,513, which is about 100 kids less than what we budgeted off of this year. Okay. Next slide. I think that's the end of it. There's a few things I'd like to cover with you. First of all, we can start working a little bit on revenue once we get the enrollment projection down, but keep in mind, we don't get even the preliminary values until the end of April. So while we'll play with some numbers, we won't know exactly where we are till then, but we're working on the revenue part now. Also keep in mind, and this is not necessarily good news, remember the last 2 years and then next year we have a funding from the federal government, the ESSER funds. And we've expended those last year and this year, and everything from next year has been allocated already. So there's the well that we've been dipping water out of is going to dry up after this next year. And once again, most of the money that we have left over, in fact, all of it has been allocated. Part of it to cover the raises that you approved last year, or for this year, and then items that we've already committed to spending for next year. So just keep that in mind. An interesting thing I saw yesterday is when they started tax compression, which was 2 sessions ago, the state was putting in approximately 50% of the funds to fund the schools. This year it's 31%. And that's because you're paying more property taxes, as the values really took a tremendous leap over the last 2 years. And the state saves quite a bit of money because the taxpayer's paying the bill. That and enrollment growth wasn't quite as big in Texas over the last 2 years. So hopefully they'll do something to balance that out. Our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, put out his 30 focuses for this session. I just saw those about an hour ago. They include increasing the homestead exemption, which we talked about that last month. That was a possibility. Vouchers is in it, which comes up every year. Hopefully that won't happen. And then he has some teacher pay raises, which is a good deal if they'll fund those. Some of them were almost, well, I'll keep opinions to myself, but he's saving us from the library books in our library and from drag queens presenting presentations in the schools. So not sure where all that came from, but it's in a bill, and that's part of his legislative priorities. So it's an interesting session already. Of course, they're just getting going with it, so hopefully most of those things will fall by the wayside. Any questions? Be happy to answer. Thoughts, cussing and discussing, or?
Thank you, Dr. Bigby.
Thank you.
Are there any questions, comments, or discussion? Trustee Colton?
Every year, the comptroller does a study of what they think our taxable values are compared to what the appraisal districts say our values are. If there's more than 5% difference between their two, then they assign the comptroller's value, which decreases our state funding. And that's why they do the study. Now, how exactly they go about it, I don't know. We've always been within that 5%, so we've been able to use our local values. I think there was 132 districts this year that didn't get to do that, though, and that can be considerable difference in what they take a higher value, so they think you're going to raise more tax money when you really don't raise it, but the state thinks you are. But that's why that study's done. And then they they just came out with it. You probably saw that. And ours was well within the 5% range. And I'm afraid there's going to be more of that, trying to separate that as they try to keep generating more money from the local taxpayer. But that's what the study's about. And it takes half a year for them to get that back to us. So if there's some adjustment, TEA has to go back and take your funding away, which we didn't lose any that way. So.
Any other questions, comments, or discussion? No? Thank you, Dr. Bigby. Okay, we will move to information discussion agenda item C, facility study and bond exploration, and the presenter is Dr. Mark Smith.
Thank you, Trustee Phillips. I'm going to ask Dr. Halashka to make your way to the podium. I have a few just opening comments. This this evening. So we are in the early stages of considering a November bond election. Part of the process is to really think through and talk through some key data points that's important for the board to be able to process. And tonight is our first step of getting out there and talking about our facility study, talking about our bond capacity, getting a feel for what the trends are with our demographers, and putting all that information together to decide what our next steps are. That's really what our goal is today. We've got a good transition plan in place for you to be able to receive the information, ask questions and process as we work our way through, and then we'll be working on next steps as we move forward. I'm going to transition to Dr. Halaska so you can map out the logistics in a little more detail.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And good evening again, Vice President Phillips, trustees, and Dr. Smith. Well, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. As you are aware, of course, our long-range strategic plan really sets the direction for the work in our district. Therefore, really in review of our goals, we have 8 of the district goals that were set and identified as being necessary in order for us to reach your vision as a board. To reach these goals, however, there are some key trends and challenges that have to be considered, along with exploring the possibility of a bond election as a means for overcoming any obstacles that prevent us from reaching our goals. Therefore, tonight you are going to hear from 3 different presenters that will give you a deep dive into the current state of our district and future trends in the areas of district demographics, financial capacity, and facility needs. We're going to first start with our demographics. So if we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. There we go. So when looking at our current demographics, you'll see that our student enrollment continues to steadily decline, although we saw a little bit of an uptick this year. Overall, in the past few years, we have seen this steady decline. We have made really strong efforts to really slow this decline through district marketing efforts and strong performance. However, that trend still continues. We also continue to see increased poverty rates. Over the past 10 years, we've had approximately a 6% increase in our overall poverty in the district. Both of these areas, of course, bring challenges to the district in regards to funding and academic readiness. However, they are not the only challenges that we're facing as a district. We've shared with the board several times the difficulties in getting students to attend school, and of course, there are also more charter schools and open enrollment districts around us, which creates increased competition for our students. In order to achieve our strategic goals, we must work together as a district and with our partners to forecast into the future so we can effectively plan. One of our partners who aids us in forecasting the demographic condition of our district is Zonda Education, formerly known as Templeton Demographics. So Mr. Bob Templeton and Mr. Hudson Huff are here to walk us through our current demographics and future trends. At the end of their presentation, they will pause so you can ask any questions about demographics, and then we'll move on to our financial condition. So.
Thank you. It is good to be here with you this evening. Tonight I'm joined by Hudson Huff, my associate who's been helping with this project. I'm going to spend just a few minutes kind of the highlights of our demographic report. You can go to the next slide. Just from the housing perspective, you're continuing to see some new housing across the district. This is your current elementary attendance zones. Those green shaded areas are the active areas that are building single-family homes. The yellow shaded areas are the future developments that are in the planning stages. You'll notice in the Alexander area, we've got strong activity there. The Homestead development is about 230 lots are in development right now, so they're turning dirt, getting lots ready. In the Hyman Elementary Zone, it's primarily future townhomes, some single-family townhome developments that are happening there. And in the north part, in the Billhart Zone, we've also got a development that's got about 120 to 130 future lots. So all in all, the district still has about 1,200 single-family future lots in the development pipeline, so there is still a little bit of development activity taking place. Of course, most recently, the changes in the interest rates are causing some slowdowns in the housing market, but I would encourage us to keep the big picture in mind. It's just a matter of time before we see the housing market pick back up, and you do eventually see new families moving into those areas with new single-family developments. Next slide. On the multifamily side, we're tracking 2 multifamily projects. There's one in the Hyman zone. It's almost 200 units that are under construction. And then you've got a larger complex in the Billhart zone, almost 400 units, 360 units under construction in the Billhart zone. Plus, there's likely going to be some additional future multifamily down the road. So again, between the single family and the multifamily, several thousand future homes for single family and multifamily to be developed down the road. Next slide. Now I wanted to show you our geocoded dot map. So we geocode your students every year. These are your actual students from this year, geocoded to their addresses. We've got about 1,156 students that reside outside the district's boundary. That's been a new trend that we've seen an increase in those that are choosing to come into the Duncanville School District. About 51% of your students actually live within the city limits of Duncanville, and then you've got some students that live in the city limits of Dallas within the Duncanville ISD boundary, and a small number that are coming from the Grand Prairie city limits as well. Next slide. Now, each year, we look at your TEA transfer report. So this is looking at this data over the last several years. That purple bar is the number of students that reside inside the district that are either transferring to neighboring districts or charter schools. Now, keep in mind, that's a little bit misleading. That doesn't necessarily mean that those students have all once attended the district. Many of those have never attended Duncanville ISD, but they physically reside here, and they may have started out in either a charter school or a neighboring school district. It's very common to have employees that work in other districts that live in the district, so that's the normal kinds of transfers that we do see. But over the last 10 years, the region has definitely seen an increase in charter school growth. New charter schools are opening in this area very frequently. So we track that as best as we can. It's very challenging to track it. TEA does not help us with this. When they make an announcement of a charter opening, they only give you the county or the region that it's located in. Then we have to track that down through either the city planning, permitting processes. We do open records requests to the charter schools. They're not very helpful in that regard, but this is a big challenge for not just Duncanville, but for all the school districts across the DFW region. Next slide. Oh, back up. I want to go back. We have seen an increase in the transfers into the district. This also matches up with that geocoded dot map. So from the TEA's perspective, we are seeing an increase, and you can see back in 2017, there was only 380 students that were choosing to transfer into the district. Last year, through the TEA transfer report, over 1,000. And I suspect this year it may be closer to 1,100 that are transferring in. That's a good sign because that means they're wanting to come in here because of the successful programs that you have here in the district. Next slide. Now we wanted to break down this newcomers, leavers. This is just a little bit different way to also look at this same type data. We've broken it down by elementary, intermediate, middle school, and high school. Now what you'll notice is we tend to see the largest numbers of newcomers, new to the district, in those elementary and intermediate grades. And then the largest number of leavers are also happening in those elementary and intermediate grades. Again, part of this ties to this charter school expansion. The charter schools tend to market, and they're really heavily going after those elementary grade levels. Also, the grade configuration of the charters, I think, is somewhat attractive to the families with school age and middle school age kids. A lot of the charters configurations are K-8, so it's a convenience factor. But we are seeing a trend that I think is going to be a trend that's going to have some stickiness to it, is we're seeing the exodus of the charters and the homeschoolers back to the public schools in those upper elementary, middle school grades. Your cohort patterns are showing that pattern. So we see a significant growth in those middle school grades. Your ninth grade, very strong growth coming into ninth grade. Again, I think it's the success of your fine arts, your athletic programs. And those charter schools cannot compete with that secondary experience, that experience of the band and athletics and that experience. So then they come back to the public schools. Also, the variety of curriculum options. There's so much more variety that the Duncanville School District has that the independent charter school can't compete at that level. So it's somewhat of a convenience for the elementary parents, but then as they get older, they want the Duncanville experience for secondary. Next slide. Now here's just a quick look at the projections at the grade level. Now I'll point out some subtleties in this. You'll notice that the largest grade is the 9th grade class. It's historically been your largest grade. The second largest grade is the green shaded cell. And you can see it's been your secondary classes that are the largest. Your 12th grade class is over 400 students larger than the kindergarten class. That's a little bit challenging in terms of enrollment growth because you've got so much larger classes exiting compared to what's coming in. Now, no doubt part of that has been the charters are pulling some of that off of the younger grade levels. We've also seen declines in birth rates, and so there's some of that at play as well. But this is what's making it challenging to establish sustained growth. Even though we're building homes, we're just top-heavy. So it's not necessarily because that we've got a problem. It's just the age of certain parts of your communities are creating this. We're seeing the same trend in Plano, in Louisville, in Grand Prairie. This trend is not isolated to just Duncanville. It's a trend we're seeing with multiple districts around. But I do think you can likely settle in at about 11,300, and then we can start to see some growth again just because that bubble and wave has moved on, and we've kind of got more balance between our 12th grade and our kindergarten class. Next slide. So at the campus level, you definitely have some campuses that are growing. You'll notice at the elementary level, it's the Hyman zone, it's the Bill Hart's zone, and we've basically got 3 campuses that are seeing the primary growth at the elementary levels. At your intermediate levels, you can see overall, because of those class sizes working through and those smaller class sizes coming up, overall at the intermediate level, we really don't anticipate much growth there for the next several years just because of the changes in the class sizes. Next slide. At your middle schools, again, it's the movement of those classes through, but you can see the middle school numbers are going to kind of bottom out at about 1,841 will be about where we'll bottom out, and then they'll start to climb again. Now, at your high school, again, it's the largest class sizes starting to exit the high school. Your high school's currently at about 4,500 students. Next year may be the largest that it'll be, and so it could settle in at about 4,100, 3,900. Also keep in mind, I really encourage districts to really focus in on the forecast for the next 5 years. Don't get too concerned about the back half because a lot can change. A lot can change in terms of the housing market. A lot can change in terms of some changes with transfer patterns related to charters. And I think we could see those start to come back to the school district. I'll do some key takeaways, then be ready to answer any questions. So next slide. Duncanville ISD's enrollment did remain level from the previous year, so we did see a little bit of growth, but overall very good numbers this year. The rising interest rates and with the inflation factors have tempered demand for new home starts, so we have seen them slow across the region. This is not anything specific to Duncanville. We have over 200 lots that have been recently delivered. There's another 200 that are in the development process. So the developers are getting ready for new housing to continue once we get past this little bit of a headwind with interest rates and inflation. So there has been a positive trend over the last 2 years related to new students coming into the district. So we think this is also going to help soften and balance the enrollment changes over the next couple of years. Within the next 5 years, we do expect your enrollment to be at about 11,300 students, and in 10 years, it could move back to about 11,600 students. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Templeton. Are there any questions, comments for trustee Vera Cruz?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I have a question. On page 90, I had a question of the 55% Hispanic. Does that include the 24 emergent bilingual, or is that two separate things going on there?
I'm not sure if that question is from our data or from the district's data.
Yeah, if you could go back to the first slide in the back there,
Page 90.
and you'll see the 55% right up there.
I was just curious because we're starting to see this percent
There you go.
emergent bilingual. This is a couple of times I've seen this, and so I was just curious, in that 55%, does it include the 24, or is it two separate things?
I'm not familiar with where that number came from.
I'll help you there. Yes, in some cases, it does include those. Your emergent bilingual may also be Hispanic. However, you may also have some Hispanic kids that don't qualify as emergent bilingual. So, yes, there are some that are included in that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions, comments, or discussion? No? Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Templeton.
Thank you.
We are getting ready. Oh, yeah, oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Templeton and Mr. Huff. We appreciate your partnership. We will now transition into looking at the financial capacity of our district. We'll go on to the next slide. So this evening, you've already heard, of course, from Dr. Bigby about how attendance impacts the financial situation in our district. However, there are also other challenges as well, such as increased inflation, growing needs of our students, our aging facilities, safety and security needs, and of course, the challenges of recruiting and retaining staff as it relates to salaries. Anytime a bond is being explored, it is important to look at our tax rate and our bond capacity. The tax rate trend shows that since 2018, the state's tax rate compression and the board's efforts have resulted in a steady decrease to our taxpayers. I'm going to now turn it over to Mr. Josh McLaughlin from BOK Financial Securities to have him come discuss our financial condition and our bond capacity. So, Mr. McLaughlin.
Good evening, Madam Vice President, Dr. Smith, members of the Board of Trustees. It's good to be with you tonight. Normally when I come and talk about a bond program this late, I put everybody to sleep, so I'll try to make this as painless for you as possible. If you flip over to the next slide, before we talk about your bond capacity, I always like to talk about how the district manages its debt portfolio. If you think the district actually sells bonds and that's it until they mature, you are dead wrong. The district actively manages its portfolio by looking at refinancing debt at a lower rate or prepaying bonds prior to final maturity and saving that interest cost. Since 2005, using these techniques, the district has saved taxpayers more than $60 million of interest cost savings. Let me say that again, more than $60 million of interest cost savings. If you flip to the next slide, please. Again, this is your tax rate trend. Every year, you know, the Board of Trustees adopts actually two tax rates. Your maintenance and operations goes for the day-to-day operations of the school district, and then your interest and sinking fund tax rate, which is used solely to pay voter-approved bonds. So what I wanted to point out tonight is two things. One, you're currently at 32 cents on the debt service side, or the INS tax rate. That is what we'll use to determine sort of your bond capacity later on in this presentation. More importantly, I like to show that the district has actually lowered its tax rate by over 26 cents in the last 5 years. Excellent work. Next slide, please. In terms of the district's last bond program, that was in November of 2014 for just over $102 million. It was passed by almost 64%, a little over more than 64%. At the time of the election, the district's INS tax rate was 37 cents. We told voters we were going to 50. The reality is we never got as high as 50. We got as high as 48.95, and you're currently at 32. So again, we would say you're great stewards of taxpayer dollars. In terms of bond capacity considerations under state law, the maximum INS tax rate is essentially 50 cents, but there is not a limit on how many bonds you can actually sell or ask voters to approve. The sale limit is only how much can you afford up to that 50-cent level. If you go to the next slide. So what is bond capacity? Simply said, this is a school district's ability to issue additional bonds in the future in light of its current tax rate, the 50-cent debt test, and its existing debt portfolio. So the way to read this graph is the red line is an indication of your future INS tax revenues at 32 cents. So as your values continue to go higher, you're generating more and more revenue. The blue is your existing bonds as they stand right now, currently have just under 199 or 190 million. So the green would be essentially your additional bond capacity under 32 cents. How many bonds we could sell and maintain that 32-cent level. So what impacts bond capacity? Interest rates, tax values, refinancing your debt at a lower interest rate. And we'll explore that here momentarily. Next slide, please. So this is your existing debt portfolio as it stands today. Again, $188 million as of February 1. You can see your debt service payments are relatively level until year 2034, and then you have a decline. So you have built-in bond capacity there. Right now, your bonds are structured over a 23-year period. Typically, when we go sell new bonds for the district, it's done over 30 years. Currently, you are rated AA3 at Moody's and AA- which at S&P, which is fantastic. Typically, every time we sell bonds, we go to the state and apply for the permanent school fund guarantee, and you get that automatic AAA rating. And we'd hopefully be able to access that program in the future. But again, you can see there's no spikes in the district's overall debt portfolio, which allows us to issue additional bonds relatively cost effectively. You go to the next slide. This just looks out of the 188 million, the district has more than 110 million outstanding that are callable prior to final maturity. Believe it or not, there's not a single bond in the district's debt portfolio right now that we can refinance at a lower rate. But you could always prepay bonds prior to final maturity. So as your values grow, you can maintain that tax rate, take excess revenues, prepay bonds. The benefit of prepaying bonds is not only do you save interest costs, but for every dollar you prepay, you're saving, you're building future bond capacity for no tax rate increase. Next slide, please. This is a bond buyer index. It gives you a general indication of what municipal interest rates are doing. And unfortunately, at the beginning of 2022, you can see everybody started to worry about inflation. And all last year, all you could hear was interest rates are going higher and higher and higher. You've seen over the last few months, interest rates have actually come back down a little bit. Now people are worried about a recession. Has the Federal Reserve increased rates too much that we're going to have a hard landing, if you will? The thing about interest rates, it's just like a home mortgage, right? The lower your interest rate, the more borrowing capacity you have. Same thing in the world of bonds. Next slide, please. The biggest factor in determining the school district's bond capacity is its tax base. As the larger the tax base you have, the more revenue you generate. The more revenue you generate, the more bond capacity you have. Currently, the district's tax values are just over $6.68 billion for the current year. If you look at what's happened over the last decade in the graph below, the largest increase was this past year at $844 million, or just under 15%. Over the last 10 years, you've grown on average $349 million, or year-over-year growth of 7.67%. And in the last 5 years, you've grown on average $483 million, or year-over-year growth of 9.39%. Now you'll notice there's a good upward trend. What I can't tell you is how much your values are going to grow in the future. So when we start talking about bond capacity here, I'm going to show you a couple different options. The other thing I wanted to point out is that little box in the middle of the graph that you had $832 million in the residential homestead cap. Under Texas law, the taxable value of your home may only go up 10% in every given year, okay? So when I look at $832 million, that would have actually hit your bottom line tax rolls, except those homes went over 10% in terms of property value growth, which means, all things being equal, if we have no future growth in the district's tax base over the next several years, for economy, for whatever reason, that $832 million will come down and hit your bottom line and hit the bottom line tax base. So you do have some built-in future growth as you stand right now. Next slide, please. Okay, so for a November 2023 bond election, we're going to show you various capacities. What's for no to increase, and then all the way to your maximum of 50 cents. But we're going to do this based upon two different growth assumptions in your tax base. One, we're going to call historical, which is growth in your tax base over the based upon the 10-year average. Optimistic, we're going to say that's growth in your tax base based upon the current 5-year average. Next slide, please. This will give you a look at the overall growth of the next couple years. What I wanted to point out here is we're only assuming 6 years worth of growth. And the reason we're only assuming 6 years worth of growth is sometimes 6 to 10 years from now, you're going to have the next bond election. We want future growth to pay for future bonds. That is why we're not going to grow your values for 30 years. Next slide, please. In terms of assumptions, we assume that you will maintain your current INS tax rate of 32 cents for next year, that any new bond program increase associated with it, assuming you go that route, will not occur until the 24-25 school year. We're assuming an interest rate of 5.25. Now, if you were to sell bonds today, it would be much closer to 4.25. The reason we're saying 5.25 is we want to be a little conservative right now. Because if you had a November 23 election, you cannot sell bonds until January of 24. It's a long time between now and then, so we're going to be a little bit conservative. Again, we would finance that over a 30-year period. Keep in mind, we do not sell bullets, so it is annual principal payments over that 30 years. It just takes 30 years to repay all the debt. And then based upon your current wealth per student, that you will not receive any state funding assistance for the repayment of bonds. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side. So assuming you grow the next 6 years at your 10-year historical average, which is $349 million, in the dark blue, that says you can issue $135 million for no tax rate increase. For a 3-cent increase, it's $171 million. To take your tax rate to 40 cents, it's $231 million. And then if we look all the way into sort of the beige, your maximum bond capacity would be around $351 million. If we look at growth at your 5-year average, again, $158 million for no increase, $197 million for 3 pennies, and then all the way your maximum bond capacity would be $392 million. Now again, this is based upon conservative interest rate assumptions. As you get closer to calling a November election, we will certainly sharpen our pencil and give you hopefully a more realistic view, but we want to be a little bit conservative given it's February of 23. Next slide, please. So let's just give you a look at historical elections since 2015. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but if you look at the bottom line, $92 billion of school district bond elections have passed across the state, which represents roughly a 79.3% passage rate. If you look at propositions, which we think is more representative of what's actually going on, 891 of the 1333 propositions have passed, which is just under 67%. But if you look at the 3 prior years in 2020, 21, and 22, you will see a substantial decline over the other years. There's a reason for that, if you will flip the slide, please. That is because elections have changed. School districts are now required to put on the ballot, regardless if you change your tax rate or not, that this is a property tax increase, and it has confused voters dramatically. And that is why you've seen a lot of these elections, unfortunately, not pass because of that language. There's also now 6 different items that you have to have a separate proposition. If you have a stadium with more than 1,000 spectators, an auditorium, a rec facility, performing arts facility, teacher housing, even technology equipment, and that includes devices. If you want to have a one-to-one initiative and you want to buy computers for your kids, that has to be a separate proposition now. If you flip to the next slide, please. Dr. Smith mentioned that a potential November election, just to give you a long-winded view of the timetable, the board would actually have to call that on or prior to August 21st. The election would occur on November 7th, and then we would be in a position to sell bonds sometime in the January or February of 2024 timeframe. I know I went through that relatively quickly. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. I know we've given you a lot of information already this evening with our demographics and our financial condition, but we're not finished yet. We will now transition to take a look at our facilities. We'll go on to the next slide. Thank you. So many of the challenges we listed up here we've already mentioned this evening. However, we've not noted that our most recent facility study was done back in 2014, which challenges us somewhat in knowing what some of our current needs are with our facilities. So Mr. Andre Brackens from Huckabee Architects is here with us this evening to share with us more information regarding our facilities and a possible facility study. So Mr. Brackens, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Hulachka. Madam Vice President, members of the Board of Trustees, and Dr. Smith, thank you for the opportunity to share these next few moments in terms of giving a facility study and space utilization update. We did we being Huckabee, conduct the 2014 facility assessment and study, and that information is about 9 years old now from that standpoint. Next slide, please. And the discussion points tonight, I wanted to take a look at the 2014 assessment overview because there's still some information in there that is valid and applicable in terms of taking the next step for space utilization analysis, which is needed, and also the need for a 2023 facility study to keep the items updated. So as we go through these points, we're not going to go through in granular detail regarding the 2014 study, but it'll show us a baseline of some of the things and some of the decisions that were made and some of the items that were prioritized by the Board of Trustees at that time in terms of things district-wide that could be done and the equity across the district, some of those things that could be done, and then it identified also things that could be done in the future from that standpoint. Next slide, please. So here's an example. As we take a look at the 2014 facility assessment data and review, the objective is to give you data and give you facts so that you can make decisions, okay? And the idea behind it, I'm giving you an example of, as we did an analysis of each of the educational facilities, we also provided an executive summary. And in this analysis, for example, for Acton Elementary School, I'll say Old Acton, that's an example of where we looked at the functional capacity of that building and some of the things that would have been necessary to bring it up to date and up to speed. And we did an analysis that looked at the cost, that also looked at the demographics and the capacity, and it made more sense to provide New Acton, basically a new facility based on that information. That was a decision made by the board, but we were able to show that data and how it made sense in terms of the use of the taxpayer dollars for that bond program. And so the information is disseminated in an executive summary. Obviously, there's granular detail for you to reference, so you have good data, you have good information, but it's presented so that you're able to take a look at, and I'll just quote it. It said in this executive summary, we want to outline the facts and figures about the work, facts about Duncanville ISD facilities, the general findings of the assessment and overall costs. Also included in those portions are a task list of needs. And in that task list of needs, it identified what each of the building facilities needed, whether it was security upgrades, technology upgrades, ADA and accessibility upgrades. It gave you that information, and ultimately, the board was able to make a decision based on a prioritization matrix to say, this is what's most important now, this is what our students need, this is what we need for equity across the district, and this is the priority of security and technology for the success of our students. Next slide, please. So this just gives you an example of Duncanville High School. This was an analysis of DHS from our 2014 assessment, and you notice it's color-coded so that there's an easy read so that you can understand what portions of the facility are administrative, athletic, fine arts, computer lab. It gives you a summary of each campus. So in a facility assessment, you're given this data and you have a great understanding of basically where the needs may or may not be. For example, this being CTE month, okay, you have a very robust CTE program. As we take a look at the current Duncanville High School and we do an analysis, a space utilization of that facility, we can look at your CTE capacity and the amount of students that you have in that program and be able to give you the information so that you can make a decision to see whether or not that student population needs relief or somehow utilizing space so that that educational delivery could take place. So those are some of the things that we were able to take a look at from a space utilization standpoint. And as we heard some of the demographics and some of the demographic numbers, it gives us some information and some data to see, well, okay, is there space that can potentially be better utilized or better leveraged to be able to take care of the educational delivery. Next slide, please. And so in our last assessment, one of the things we looked at was something called aging facilities. Okay, and the aging facilities, basically, you have several educational structures that, you know, maybe average being 50 years old, and they're just things that, you know, with a building of that age that need to be maintained and or replaced. For example, roofs, HVAC equipment, security and technology upgrades. So we did several packages. We call one package the aging facilities package, and then we did another package which was safety, security, and maintenance. And we were able to take a look at these packages and give it to you in terms of a rating or a priority so that you could prioritize what got done at that time and what would be done at a later time or potentially a future bond. And so basically, and I know Mrs. Moore is very familiar with all of this, you got over 2 million square feet of district-wide buildings. That's a lot of roofs, that's a lot of HVAC systems, but your operations team does a great job in terms of keeping track of all of that, the age, the useful life of a lot of the equipment, and when you start needing to be preparing to replace it, from that standpoint. The roof repair and replacement, HVAC units, the ADA compliant site access, and the restrooms as well. So again, with over 2 million square feet, you had to look at priorities. So a lot of it we were able to get to in terms of providing access on, you know, buildings that are, you know, 40, 50 years old, and also upgrading restrooms so that students have access. So we came up with an overall ADA plan for the long term, and then ultimately you determined through your prioritization matrix that we provided what the priorities would be and what we would do in that particular bond and what would be done ultimately in the future. We also looked at several interior upgrades as well throughout the facility, and that just gives you some of the photos of some of the items we identified in 2014. But one of the things that I really want to point out is that you know, in 2014, the items that were prioritized, it was based on the Board of Trustees looking at the prioritization matrix and looking at what was best for the students, what was best for Duncanville ISD in terms of the priorities. So next slide, please. And so this just gives you an example from Daniel and from Bill Hartz. And if you'll see in that matrix, it identifies a category. So in that top matrix, you'll see that the category section shows security, and it gives basically what's recommended in terms of the description and ranking of the task. You know, upgrade surveillance system and add cameras to the interior and exterior. So each of the facilities was ranked that way for example, I think that's a great example of the security items. Looking at Bill Hartz, for example, you can take a look at some of the things that were identified. Now, some of these items you'll notice under the category portion for Bill Hartz, these were code or Texas accessibility standard issues that needed to be addressed. So obviously on your priority matrix, as you made a decision, those items were prioritized and taken care of at that time, also with an overall plan of addressing some of these items later. For example, if you look at the bottom orange portion, it said interiors, interior upgrades. Well, that was something to be determined because of the priority and the necessity of the accessibility items and the code items that needed to be immediately addressed. Next slide, please. So why an updated assessment is necessary? Again, the last assessment was 9 years ago, but this will give you the information to document the deficiencies and needs in the district's facilities when compared with your established standards. Okay? I think the second important item it does is that it further serves as a tool so that you can make decisions about the future of the district as it relates to the facilities and how well those facilities support the district's mission. And third, why it's necessary, it allows for a determination of the level to which the facilities are consistent and provide a reasonable level of equity across all district facilities for all learners. So it gives you a baseline of data and pricing so that you can strategically plan and prioritize. And so with that, I believe we'll go ahead and turn it over to questions. Next slide. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Brackens. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion? No? Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Brackens. So tonight, you've taken a deep dive into the current state of our district, and although we're doing so many great things in Duncanville ISD, there are still several challenges that we've shared with you that can hinder us in meeting our strategic goals if further actions are not taken. So in looking at how to address these challenges, there have been several standard things considered. However, the most feasible, we believe, is a bond of election. Next slide. In the past, our community has been highly supportive of our schools and have demonstrated this support through the passing of bond elections and, of course, with the TRE in 2018. Next slide. But you may be asking, why a bond? So school districts, as you know, we're funded through maintenance and operations dollars as well as interest in sinking. You've heard that several times this evening. M&O funds are what we receive, of course, through state and federal funding and is the money that we use to operate the district. M&O funds are allocated by a set formula, and districts are unable to acquire any additional M&O funds unless they have an increase, of course, in attendance or state money, which we don't see happening yet. 86% of these funds currently go to salaries in our district, and generally speaking, of course, INS funds are what the districts receive through bond dollars, and they're limited to, of course, long-term costs like new buses, renovations, new construction, and other capital improvements. Therefore, since we do not have additional M&O dollars, we would need to go to the voters and ask for their help through a bond in order to gain funds on the INS side. Next slide. Of course, we're not ready to make a recommendation on a bond election, but would like to start working to gather more information through a facility study. The board would then make a decision regarding whether to bring together a Citizens Facility Advisory Committee to look further into a potential bond. Next slide. Tonight's presentation has been to provide you, as the board, with a comprehensive look at where we currently are as a district in regards to our demographics, our finances, and our facilities. And of course, there is no action that will be taken this evening, but I would like to first thank all of our presenters, Zonda Education, BOK Financial, and Huckabee for being here this evening. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions or collect any feedback as we look towards next steps.
Thank you, Dr. Halachka. Are there any questions, comments, or discussion for Dr. Halachka? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now move to communications from citizens. And since there are no communications from citizens, this meeting, well, let me say this. Being that there are no further items to discuss, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.